On the night of the 18th of October 2007, in a quiet Johannesburg suburb, a group of armed carjackers opened fire on a man sitting in his car. They didn't recognize him. Some later claimed they thought he was Nigerian, simply because they were operating in an area with a large Nigerian community. They had no idea they had just killed one of the greatest musicians Africa had ever produced. His name was Lucky Dube, and this is his story. Welcome to Peak World. If you're new here, please like this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our stories. Lucky Philip Dube was born on the 3rd of August 1964 in Ermelo, in what was then the Eastern Transvaal, now the province of Mpumalanga, South Africa. His parents separated before he was born, and he was raised primarily by his mother, Sarah Dube. After suffering several miscarriages before his birth, Sarah regarded his arrival as nothing short of a miracle. That is why she named him Lucky. Like millions of black South Africans living under apartheid, Sarah faced impossible choices. The pass laws and discriminatory labor system forced many parents to leave home for long periods in search of work. As a result, Lucky and his siblings, Thandi and Patrick, spent much of their childhood in the care of their grandmother. Life was far from easy, but those early hardships helped shape the person Lucky would become. More importantly, they introduced him to the one thing that would define his entire life: music. From a young age, Lucky loved to sing. He joined his school choir, and by the age of 9 he was already conducting it. His teachers quickly noticed that he possessed not only an exceptional singing voice, but also natural leadership and confidence far beyond his years. As he grew older, his fascination with music only deepened. After school, Lucky and several friends would secretly borrow instruments from the school band room. Together they formed a small group known as the Skyway Band, performing Mbaqanga, a uniquely South African style that blended traditional Zulu rhythms with jazz and electric instruments. During the 1970s, Mbaqanga dominated South African music. Groups like the Soul Brothers filled dance halls and topped the charts. For any ambitious young musician, it was the obvious path to success. Lucky soon joined his cousin Richard Saluma's group, the Love Brothers, where he gained valuable experience as both a singer and performer. In 1979, while still a teenager, he recorded his first single. Over the next few years, he established himself as a respected Mbaqanga artist, recording under the name Lucky Dube and the Super Soul. His records sold well. Audiences loved him. His future looked secure. By every measure, Lucky Dube had already become a successful recording artist. Then everything changed. In the early 1980s, Lucky discovered the music of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Jimmy Cliff. Their songs had a profound effect on him. Unlike much of the popular music he had grown up performing, reggae wasn't simply entertainment. It spoke openly about oppression, injustice, poverty, freedom, and the dignity of ordinary people. To many listeners, those were Jamaican stories. To Lucky, they sounded exactly like South Africa. Apartheid had denied millions of black South Africans basic human rights. Families had been separated by pass laws. Entire communities had been forcibly removed from their homes. Economic opportunities were deliberately restricted, and political freedom barely existed. Lucky realized that reggae gave voice to the very struggles he saw around him every day. He began slipping reggae songs into his live performances. The response surprised him. Audiences didn't reject the new sound. They embraced it. Night after night, the crowds responded with overwhelming enthusiasm. That reaction convinced Lucky that reggae wasn't simply another musical genre. It was his calling. In 1984, despite strong resistance from his record company, he made one of the boldest decisions of his career. He would record an album entirely in the reggae style. The executives thought he was making a terrible mistake. From their perspective, reggae belonged to Jamaica. South African audiences, they argued, wanted Mbaqanga. A black South African reggae artist would never succeed commercially. Lucky refused to accept that. He wasn't trying to copy Jamaica. He wanted to create something new. He wanted to create African reggae, music inspired by reggae's message, but rooted in African realities, African experiences, and African voices. The result was a mini-album titled Rastas Never Die. It represented a complete break from everything that had already made him successful. Commercially, the gamble failed. The album sold only around 4,000 copies, a dramatic decline from the approximately 30,000 copies his Mbaqanga albums usually sold. Then came an even bigger setback. The apartheid government banned the album because of its politically charged lyrics, particularly songs like War and Crime, which openly criticized violence and injustice. For many artists, that would have been the end of the experiment. The record company had been proven right. Sales had collapsed. The government had censored the album. Every sign pointed toward returning to the safer, more profitable Mbaqanga music that had already made him famous. Most artists would have accepted defeat. Lucky Dube didn't. Despite the commercial failure of Rastas Never Die and the apartheid government's ban on the album, he remained convinced that reggae was the music he had been born to make. He believed the problem wasn't reggae itself, it was simply that South Africans had not yet been given the chance to embrace it. Without informing his record company, Lucky quietly returned to the recording studio. He was determined to prove that reggae could speak with an African voice and find an audience far beyond Jamaica. In 1985, he released Think About the Children. This time, everything changed. The album became an enormous commercial success, eventually earning platinum status and introducing millions of South Africans to reggae through an artist who spoke directly to their own experiences. Almost overnight, Lucky Dube became South Africa's first true reggae superstar. More importantly, he proved something many people had dismissed as impossible. Reggae did not belong only to Jamaica. Its rhythms may have been born in the Caribbean, but its message of justice, freedom, dignity, and equality resonated just as deeply across Africa. From that point onward, there was no turning back. Throughout the late 1980s, Lucky released one successful album after another. His music addressed subjects many performers preferred to avoid. He sang about apartheid, racial discrimination, poverty, corruption, violence, colonialism, the legacy of slavery, and the dream of African unity. Yet what made his music remarkable was that it never felt like a political speech. His songs told stories. They spoke to ordinary people struggling to survive, raise families, and maintain hope in difficult circumstances. Listeners heard their own lives reflected in his lyrics. That authenticity became one of the defining reasons for his success. Unlike many protest musicians whose influence declined after apartheid ended, Lucky adapted his message to changing times. Democracy had arrived in South Africa, but poverty, crime, inequality, and corruption had not disappeared. Rather than celebrating political victory alone, he continued asking uncomfortable questions about the society that was emerging. His music remained socially conscious without becoming tied to any political party or ideology. In 1987, Lucky released Slave. For many South Africans, this became the album that transformed him from a successful singer into a household name. The songs reached audiences across racial and cultural boundaries, proving that meaningful music could also achieve mainstream commercial success. Then came the album many critics still regard as the masterpiece of his career. In 1989, Lucky released Prisoner. The album became one of the defining African records of its generation. Songs such as Prisoner, I've Got You Babe, and War and Crime demonstrated his extraordinary ability to combine memorable melodies with thoughtful social commentary. The title track carried a message that reached far beyond prison walls. Although many listeners interpreted it as a political statement about apartheid, Lucky often explained that every person could become a prisoner in different ways, trapped by hatred, addiction, poverty, fear, or injustice. That universal message helped the song travel far beyond South Africa. People from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds found something deeply personal in his music. The following year, he released Captured Live. The album confirmed what audiences already knew. Lucky Dube was not only an exceptional songwriter, he was an extraordinary live performer. His concerts possessed an energy that recordings alone could never fully capture. Whether performing before a few hundred people or tens of thousands, Lucky delivered every song with the same passion and sincerity. His band became known for its outstanding musicianship, blending traditional reggae rhythms with African melodies, rich keyboard arrangements, and powerful guitar work. Together, they created a sound that was unmistakably Lucky Dube. Both Prisoner and Captured Live received prestigious OKTV awards, then considered South Africa's highest music honours. Recognition was no longer coming only from fans. The music industry itself had begun acknowledging that Lucky Dube had become one of the country's greatest artists. By the early 1990s, his popularity had spread across the African continent. His records sold in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, and many other countries. Radio stations across Africa played his songs daily. He was becoming one of the few African musicians whose fame truly crossed national borders. Then came another landmark achievement. In 1993, Lucky released Victims. The album sold more than 1 million copies worldwide, an extraordinary accomplishment for any African artist during that period. Its title track remains one of the most emotionally powerful songs of his career. Rather than taking sides in political conflicts, Victims reminds listeners that ordinary people almost always pay the highest price for violence. Leaders make decisions, armies fight wars, politicians argue, but families lose parents, children lose homes, communities lose hope. It was a message that resonated across continents because it spoke to a universal truth. As Lucky's international reputation continued growing, major record companies began paying close attention. In 1995, he signed a worldwide recording agreement with Motown Records, one of the most famous labels in music history. For an artist whose own record company had once insisted reggae would never succeed in South Africa, the achievement carried enormous significance. Only a decade earlier, executives had doubted his vision. Now, one of the world's most respected music companies wanted to distribute his work internationally. The honors continued. In 1996, his compilation album Serious Reggae Business earned him the World Music Award for Best-Selling African Recording Artist. He also received the International Artist of the Year Award at the Ghana Music Awards. By this point, Lucky Dube had become much more than South Africa's biggest reggae musician. He had become one of Africa's greatest cultural ambassadors. His performances took him across Europe, North America, the Caribbean, Asia, and nearly every corner of Africa. Along the way, he shared stages with internationally renowned performers including Peter Gabriel, Sting, Sinead O'Connor, Ziggy Marley, and even Michael Jackson at major international events. Yet perhaps no single performance better symbolized his acceptance into reggae history than his appearance at Reggae Sunsplash in Jamaica. For reggae musicians, there was no greater stage. This was the festival where legends were made. Many wondered whether an African performer could truly win over a Jamaican audience that had grown up with the music. Lucky answered that question almost immediately. His band delivered a performance unlike anything the audience expected. They respected reggae's traditional foundations while blending them with unmistakable African musical influences. The result was both familiar and completely original. When the performance ended, the audience refused to let him leave. Encore followed encore. Festival organizers invited Lucky back onto the stage for an extended performance, a rare honor at one of reggae's most prestigious festivals. That night, Lucky Dube achieved something remarkable. He proved that reggae had come full circle. A musical movement born in the Caribbean had found one of its greatest ambassadors back on the African continent. And from that moment onward, his place among the world's greatest reggae artists was beyond question. By the late 1980s, Lucky Dube was no longer simply a successful South African musician. He had become something much bigger. His music was crossing borders that politics could not. People who had never visited South Africa were now singing his songs. Audiences who knew little about apartheid suddenly understood its human cost through his lyrics. And unlike many African artists of the era, Lucky wasn't trying to imitate American or European music. He was exporting an unmistakably African sound to the rest of the world. His 1987 album Slave became the record that truly established him as one of South Africa's biggest recording artists. The title itself carried enormous symbolism. While the legal institution of slavery had ended long before, Lucky argued that millions of people remained prisoners of poverty, racism, corruption, and economic exploitation. His message resonated far beyond South Africa. Then came the album that many fans still regard as his masterpiece. In 1989, Lucky released Prisoner. The title track compared the lives of ordinary people trapped by injustice to prisoners locked behind invisible bars. Other songs, such as I've Got You Babe, showcased a softer side of his songwriting, proving he could write about love with the same sincerity that he wrote about politics. Meanwhile, War and Crime continued his outspoken criticism of violence and oppression. The album became one of the defining African records of its generation. It wasn't simply successful, it became timeless. The following year, Lucky released Captured Live. Many artists sound their best inside recording studios. Lucky Dube sounded even better on stage. His concerts were energetic, emotional, and deeply spiritual. People didn't simply attend his shows to hear music, they came to experience a message. Both Prisoner and Captured Live received OKTV awards, then among South Africa's highest music honors. By now, Lucky had become one of the country's biggest stars. But South Africa was only the beginning. A voice heard around the world. In 1993, Lucky released one of the most important albums of his entire career, Victims. The title song remains one of the greatest protest songs ever written by an African artist. Rather than blaming one political side or another, Lucky focused on those who suffered most whenever violence erupted. Ordinary people, children, families, communities caught between powerful forces they couldn't control. The chorus carried a heartbreaking truth. The real victims of political conflict are almost never the politicians themselves. It is the ordinary people who bury their loved ones. That message resonated across the globe. The album reportedly sold more than 1 million copies worldwide, an extraordinary achievement for an African artist during the early 1990s. By this point, Lucky's audience stretched far beyond South Africa. Fans embraced him throughout Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and across Europe, the Caribbean, and North America. International record companies began paying attention. In 1995, Lucky signed a worldwide recording agreement with Motown Records. That was no ordinary label. Motown had launched the careers of legends including Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, Lionel Richie, and the Jackson 5. For a South African reggae artist to sign with such an iconic company was a remarkable milestone. It showed that African music had earned a permanent place on the global stage. The recognition continued. His compilation album Serious Reggae Business earned him the Best-Selling African Recording Artist Award at the 1996 World Music Awards. He also won International Artist of the Year at the Ghana Music Awards. Each new award confirmed the same reality. Lucky Dube had become one of Africa's greatest musical ambassadors, standing shoulder to shoulder with reggae legends. As his reputation grew, Lucky began sharing stages with some of the biggest names in world music. He performed alongside Peter Gabriel, Sting, Sinead O'Connor, Ziggy Marley, and even Michael Jackson during international events. Yet perhaps no performance mattered more than one that took place thousands of kilometers away from South Africa, Jamaica, the birthplace of reggae. For years, critics had insisted that reggae belonged exclusively to Jamaica. Many believed that no African artist could ever truly succeed within the genre. Lucky intended to prove them wrong. He was invited to perform at Reggae Sunsplash, widely regarded as the world's premier reggae festival. Simply receiving an invitation was already a tremendous honor. But what happened next surprised almost everyone. Lucky didn't merely perform, he captivated the audience. His band combined classic reggae rhythms with African melodies, layered keyboards, and distinctive vocal harmonies. The result sounded both familiar and completely original. When the performance ended, the crowd refused to let him leave. They demanded encore after encore. Lucky returned to the stage repeatedly. It was an extraordinary reception. That night, he demonstrated something many critics had once dismissed as impossible. An African reggae artist could stand shoulder to shoulder with Jamaica's finest performers. On reggae's biggest stage, in reggae's own birthplace. From that moment forward, no one questioned whether reggae belonged in Africa. Lucky Dube had answered that question himself. 22 albums, 3 languages, 1 message. By the mid-1990s, Lucky Dube had become Africa's best-selling reggae musician. During a career spanning roughly 25 years, he recorded 22 albums. Remarkably, he performed in 3 different languages: Zulu, English, and Afrikaans. That multilingual approach allowed him to reach audiences across racial and cultural boundaries during one of South Africa's most divided periods. Whether someone lived in Johannesburg, Lusaka, Kingston, London, or New York, there was something in Lucky's music they could understand: justice, hope, freedom, human dignity. Those themes are universal. The extraordinary Fiji story. One of the most remarkable stories of Lucky Dube's career took place thousands of kilometers from Africa. In 1993, he performed in Suva, the capital of Fiji. His popularity there was astonishing. According to accounts that have since become part of Lucky Dube folklore, several prison inmates escaped from custody simply to attend his concert. When police eventually located them, they arrived ready to arrest the escapees immediately. Lucky reportedly intervened. Instead of allowing the show to be interrupted, he pleaded with the officers to let the prisoners watch the remainder of the concert before taking them back to jail. The officers agreed. The inmates watched the rest of the performance in handcuffs before peacefully returning to prison. Whether every detail of the story unfolded exactly as it has been told over the years is difficult to verify completely. But one thing is beyond dispute. The story has endured because it perfectly captures the extraordinary respect Lucky inspired wherever he performed. Few musicians could claim that people were willing to risk imprisonment simply to hear them sing. A different kind of reggae star. Despite his enormous success, Lucky Dube often surprised people. Many associated reggae culture with marijuana, heavy drinking, and a rebellious lifestyle. Lucky challenged those assumptions. He neither drank alcohol nor used drugs. He believed musicians had a responsibility to set an example. Some Rastafarians criticized him because he did not fully embrace Rastafarian religious practices. Lucky respected their beliefs. But he explained that reggae, for him, was not a religion. It was a message: justice, equality, freedom, African pride. Those ideals mattered far more to him than labels or rituals. He often said religion could divide people. Music could unite them. That philosophy shaped everything he wrote. By the early 2000s, Lucky Dube had become more than a musician. He had become a symbol. Millions saw him as the conscience of modern Africa. A man who spoke uncomfortable truths, yet always believed a better future was possible. And despite constant touring across continents, there was one role he treasured above all others: being a father. He had 7 children. Whenever his demanding schedule allowed, he made time for family. No one, not his fans, not his children, not even Lucky himself, could have imagined how suddenly that remarkable journey was about to end. The night that shocked Africa. By the early 2000s, Lucky Dube had achieved something very few African musicians ever had. He wasn't simply famous. He was respected. Across Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, and even the Pacific Islands, millions knew his songs by heart. His music had become the soundtrack to people's struggles, hopes, and dreams. Yet despite his worldwide success, Lucky remained remarkably grounded. Friends often described him as quiet, humble, and devoted to his children. Whenever he wasn't touring, he tried to spend as much time with his family as possible. Then came the 18th of October 2007. It began like any ordinary evening. Lucky drove 2 of his children to visit their uncle in Rosettenville, a suburb south of Johannesburg. After dropping them off, he climbed back into his silver Chrysler 300C. Before he could pull away, everything changed. A group of armed men approached the vehicle. Their target wasn't Lucky Dube. Their target was his car. Luxury vehicles had become prime targets for organized carjacking syndicates operating across Johannesburg. Within seconds, the situation turned violent. When Lucky resisted, or was perceived by the attackers to be resisting, the gunmen opened fire. Several bullets struck him at close range. The attackers sped away in the stolen vehicle. Lucky Dube lay bleeding in the street. Emergency services rushed him to hospital. Doctors fought to save him, but it was too late. Lucky Philip Dube was pronounced dead. He was just 43 years old. A nation in mourning. The news spread with astonishing speed. Radio stations interrupted their regular programming. Television broadcasters carried breaking news bulletins. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Across South Africa, many people simply refused to believe it. How could the man who had spent his life singing about peace become another victim of violence? Outside his home, fans gathered in disbelief. Many cried openly. Others sang his songs through the night. Across Africa, tributes poured in from every direction. Governments issued official statements. Fellow musicians expressed their grief. Radio stations from Lagos to Nairobi played Lucky Dube songs continuously. In countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and the Gambia, his death felt almost personal. For millions of Africans, Lucky Dube didn't belong to one country. He belonged to the continent. Ironically, many observers noted that while Lucky was hugely respected inside South Africa, his international reputation was arguably even greater. In many parts of Africa, he was regarded not merely as a South African musician, but as Africa's greatest reggae artist. The investigation. Police immediately launched a nationwide investigation. Within weeks, detectives arrested several suspects. The case attracted enormous attention, not only because the victim was internationally famous, but because it exposed South Africa's worsening crisis of violent crime. Carjackings had become increasingly common. Many South Africans feared they could become victims at any moment. If someone as famous as Lucky Dube wasn't safe, who was? The investigation eventually led prosecutors to 3 accused men. In March 2009, all 3 were convicted of murder, attempted robbery, and related offences. Each received life imprisonment. For many fans, the verdict brought justice. But it did not bring closure. No sentence could replace the voice that Africa had lost. The identity controversy. The trial revealed another unexpected twist. One of the convicted men appeared in court under the name Ludwig Gatshoa, but during proceedings he claimed his real name was Julio Sirinza, a Mozambican citizen. According to his testimony, when he applied for South African identity documents, a Home Affairs official allegedly advised him to adopt a Xhosa name instead of using his birth name. The allegation raised disturbing questions. How easy was it to obtain fraudulent South African identity documents? How widespread was corruption inside the Department of Home Affairs? Could weaknesses in the immigration system be exploited by criminal networks? These issues quickly became part of the national conversation. The testimony also complicated one of the most widely repeated stories surrounding Lucky Dube's murder. Soon after the shooting, reports circulated claiming the attackers believed Lucky was Nigerian because they were operating in an area with a large Nigerian community. That explanation spread rapidly through newspapers and television reports. But the trial introduced new uncertainties. If one of the convicted men himself claimed to have been using a false South African identity, then the mistaken identity explanation became far less straightforward than many people had assumed. To this day, historians and journalists generally treat that claim with caution. The evidence never fully established exactly what the attackers believed in those final moments. What remains beyond dispute is much simpler. They intended to steal a car, and in doing so, they killed one of Africa's greatest musicians. A legacy that refuses to fade. Even after his death, Lucky Dube's music never disappeared. In 2008, Rykodisc released Retrospective, introducing many American listeners to songs they had never heard before. Then, in 2017, Gallo Records commemorated the 10th anniversary of his passing with a special 25-track collection celebrating his remarkable career. New generations continue discovering his music every year. Songs like Prisoner, Slave, Together as One, Different Colors/One People, Remember Me, It's Not Easy, and Victims remain staples on radio stations across Africa. Many young artists still cite him as one of their greatest influences. More than a musician. Lucky Dube never became a politician. He never held public office. He never led an army. He never commanded a political movement. Yet through nothing more than his voice, his lyrics, and his unwavering commitment to truth, he influenced millions. His music challenged apartheid. It condemned corruption. It defended human dignity. It celebrated African identity. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded people that ordinary men, women, and children are almost always the ones who suffer most whenever violence and injustice prevail. That message remains just as relevant today as it was 40 years ago. Nearly 2 decades after his death, Lucky Dube's murder remains one of South Africa's most heartbreaking reminders that violent crime can claim anyone. Fame could not protect him. Wealth could not protect him. Talent could not protect him. But while bullets silenced his voice, they could not silence his message. Today, Lucky Dube is remembered not simply as Africa's greatest reggae musician, but as a man who transformed music into a force for justice, unity, and hope. His songs continue to inspire millions across the world, And perhaps that is the greatest victory any artist can achieve, long after the singer is gone. The music keeps playing. What is your favorite Lucky Dube song, and what message from his music has stayed with you over the years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories from Peak World. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.